Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we're returning to the subject of Plex media server testing, and today we're looking at the quite new Intel N5105. That's right, this is a CPU that was launched at the start of 2025, and much like the other CPUs that we're looking at in this series, we're going to be looking at 1080p, 4K and 8K performance, both native playback and transcoding. If you've not been following the other videos, a quick little reminder here at the beginning. We're going to be utilizing the web browser on and off for the testing here, because we're able to control a lot of the conversions there in the background. On the right hand side of the screen, we've got the dashboard here for the Plex server we're going to be running on here that has the N150 CPU. We're also going to be dipping in and out of utilizing the client for Windows sometimes when we're going to be looking at files that are particularly large. Sorry for knocking the table there. And throughout the course of this testing, we are going to be utilizing this device here. This is from GMK Tech. It is their new 4-bay NVMe SSD flash system. And as you can see here, it is the Nutbox G9. It's running on the Intel N5105. Currently available for about 168 nickel, which is pretty cheap. That's without any storage. And we are going to be utilizing the Ubuntu OS this includes, so notwithstanding you can run third-party NAS operating system, I am going to be running this on the Linux Plex media server software, the application running there on the NAS, and we're accessing it here on a Windows environment. So those are the parameters there. Again, thanks for GMK for supplying the device for today's test. Another thing, we are utilizing a Plex Pass enabled account here. What that means is if we go down to the transcoder, that we can set this to make my CPU hurt, and we can take advantage of integrated graphics for hardware transcoding on the bottom right there. To put just give you an understanding of what that means, here is the dashboard. If we go into the NAS and I go ahead and play a relatively small file, so we're going to go for an HEVC file here. Should play in original quality. You can see it playing. You can see it playing back there. But if I choose to lower the quality there to 480p, we're able to see the HW appear on the right hand side of the screen here, and that denotes hardware transcoding. It means we're using the part of the CPU designed for integrated graphics there. And for those of you that are going to be streaming media remotely on limited internet connections, or you're going to be utilizing legacy devices that maybe don't support HEVC or highly efficient video codec or other compression techniques in audio or video, you're going to want to know just how well this NAS system is able to transcode those files. Also, we're only going to be accessing this via a single client device. We're not going to be looking at multiple client devices at once. So try to factor in, if you're going to be utilizing this NAS using an N150 CPU, that even though it has 1 GHz integrated graphics when needed, that you're going to have to multiply active users at any given time. And this system is running on 12 gig of DDR5 or LPDDR5 memory. But again, the amount of memory in your NAS system may differ on a case-to-case basis. Another of you have been requesting this because the N150 is the refresh of the popular N100 NAS CPU. These two CPUs, both forming the Alder Lake series, are incredibly similar, very similar in their capabilities, clock speed, profiling, cores, threads, and lanes. But the difference is this CPU brings with it to the table an enhanced integrated graphics capability there. And that's really what we are looking at here. But without further ado, let's crack on with our testing. Let's go straight into 1080p. And we're going to start with a H.265. Nice and simple 1080p file. This is comparable, I would say, to the majority of HD high profile media that you may be watching these days. Again, 10 megabits per second is the bit rate. That is the amount of data per second being transferred. This file is around 13 megabytes per 13 megabytes in size, and it's only 30 seconds long. And as you can see, the CPU here on the right, absolutely nothing to be concerned with there. Plex is utilizing 0.4% of the available CPU, and RAM utilization was borderline non-existent, above the already 1% being used by Plex. So now we're going to move it up there. We're going to go for a 10-bit HDR HEVC version there. And as we can see, it's playing it natively absolutely fine. But what we're going to do is transcode that, or convert that down to just 160p. That's a tiny file. That is potato quality there. And as you can see, we're using hardware transcoding there, and the CPU, again, spiked to just 8% there. That's quite a big transcode there, and I'm quite impressed with what we're seeing there for such a modest CPU. Keep in mind the TDP reported on this CPU, if we scroll on down and find the TDP, it might even be there close to the top, it's just 6 watts. That's the base power, of course. The amount of power being consumed will differ as the more aggressive processes take place, but at 6 watts, we expect this CPU to be incredibly efficient. We're going to go to a 30 megabits per second HEVC file, original quality, CPU there. Small spike, we're now hitting around 10% there on CPU utilization. Again, no transcoding taking place, and there RAM utilization absolutely fine. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to go for the 30 megabits per second HEVC file in a moment, but at the same time I'm going to access this NAS and play exactly the same file here utilizing the client here. Now there is the potential for a bandwidth throttle, because keep in mind that this is now the PC connecting to this twice. So if we open up my network connections there and we double check how we're connected to this device, you can see I am using a 10 megabits per second connection there. Also, the NAS has got 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. So we've got around 250 to 279 megabytes per second to play with. Not megabits, megabytes, much bigger. So there should be no bandwidth throttling there for us to be concerned with. But for now, let's have a look at that then, get the right file. We're going to play both. We're going to play 2 versions of that file simultaneously. And again, both of them should be playing in original quality there. As you can see, original quality of both of them playing. CPU utilization has gone up. We've gone up to 16% there with 2 accessing users. Keep in mind again, this isn't that it's just HD. HD, isn't going to impress too many people, but it's HD, but at 30 megabits per second. This is quite a large file by comparison to most domestic media you may be watching. And if we go for a double transcode there, we convert both of them down to 160p. We refresh this page here to make sure that we're actually seeing that transcoding taking place. And as we can see down there, CPU utilization not too shabby. We're seeing the transcode, and there CPU spiked at 12%. So again, not too much to be worried about, and quite an impressive little connection there between the two of them. Let's go ahead and repeat that same process, and this time playing a 100 megabits per second HD file across both systems. So we're just going to play it natively immediately, and both of them leave them to play natively. Again, a very dense file that we're playing with across both of these systems. Seeing a slight bandwidth slowdown there on the browser-based access there, although both of them are still mounted and playing there. As you can see, it really is just a question of what's been not caught up on there in the web browser. CPU utilization now reaching 20%, but overall not too shabby there. So let's make our way into some 4K. And now I could go for a 120 megabit file there. In fact, let's go and play that on its own, just to make sure we can catalog that as we play. And it looks like the web browser there may be having some refresh difficulties because we are still seeing that file being played there. Let's go ahead and stop that file being played and refresh the browser. So now we've got that 120 megabits per second 4K file running across both of these systems side by side. We'll take a look. The CPU is now reaching 28, close to 30% there. And we've got hardware transcoding and native playback side by side. So again, at 30% utilization, we're able to play 2 4K files and convert one of them down to 240p. So overall, really impressed with what I'm seeing here. Now before we close out on 4K, let's play the mega file. This is my 400 megabits per second 4K file. This is a 1.4 gigabyte file here. And 1.4 gigabytes for 30 seconds is sort of crazy. And one of the problems I always have playing this file is trying to play it in the web browser is borderline useless. It's just too much bandwidth. And although as you can see there, Chrome is utilizing 427 megabytes per second on this one tab alone. If we open up my task manager here, we're still not using all the memory on my host system. It's just simply playing a file of this scale in the web browser is often impossible. So we're kind of forced to make our way back over here to that client device, and from there, using the client app, we're playing a 400 megabits per second 1.4 gigabyte 30-second 4K file in HEVC 10-bit HDR, and we're playing like a dream. And we only spiked at 26% utilization there. So again, lovely stuff. And if we do an insane bit of transcoding there down to 240p, We'll see what happens, and it's playing that file at 240p, and the CPU utilization, we're waiting for that to refresh there to indicate the hardware transcoding. But while it's doing that, we're able to see the CPU only went to 16%. There's the hardware transcoding. It played it like a dream. Next up, let's play a couple of rather dense HDR files. We're going to play Roast Duck, which is an 8-bit 60 megabits per second HEVC file, and at the same time we're going to play Beauty of Taiwan. Beauty of Taiwan, again, another HEVC 256 file there. So let's play those side by side, and I'll have them running there in the web browser in the case of both. Again, run that on top of there. We've got a conversion happening there in the web browser, and the tab here running in the app is running in original quality there. Let's go for a conversion that we can vouch for there rather than forcing it to do one that it's perhaps not geared for. And as we can see, there's our original playback, there's our 4K transcoding, and CPU utilization spiked to 18%, but not too much to be worried about there. But I will say, once again, in the web browser, we are seeing those limitations that we mentioned earlier on, but it does play there in the end. And between the two of them, native 4K, again, not too bad CPU utilization. Happy with what I'm seeing here, and definitely scope to maybe play back 3 or 4 copies of this file simultaneously there at home. Which now brings us to Plex 8K testing. Now 8K, let's face it, Plex is barely geared towards 8K. The reason I include 8K testing when I test these NAS CPUs is largely for future proofing. Very few of you are going to be streaming original 8K media natively on your local area network. I mean, hell, if we go for Helium Fire here on the web browser to play back, again, this is a 8K file playing in its original quality in the web browser is borderline impossible, and sometimes it's even related to the audio codec. But things like V1 or V91, as you can see, it's trying to do the transcoding there, but it is able to play it. But what you'll find is not only will the frame rate not really keep up, and you can see there CPU utilization is still not too shabby, but there at the bottom left of the screen you're able to see that dark orange, which is the buffering, the laying out of those files, versus the light orange of playback are just closing in on one another. So if you are going to be enjoying 8K, make sure you're using a device and definitely an output app that is ready for 8K, because clearly Chrome is not ready. But if I go ahead and convert that automatically, and that will not likely downgrade it to 4K multimedia playback there, while it's doing that, why don't we open up that client application and run the exact same file. And in this case, Windows is able to play back the original quality of this 8K file completely natively. We've got both versions. Again, the buffering there in the background happening on the web browser, not really keeping up there. But if we have a look at the CPU spiking at just 18%, it does mean that as long as you've got natively ready 8K client devices, this CPU is going to be able to cut it. And if we look at the task manager here on my local PC, yes, we're using a lot of 4K. I'm using 42% of RAM there, and GPU utilization is quite high, as you can see there, and a big part of that is because of Plex. It means if you are running a client device that can support 8K, that will definitely allow for that overhead, and this CPU can output 8K very well. But if we go with hardware transcoding, let's move it down to 480p. It'll be interesting to see just how much of the CPU spike that we're going to see, and we'll give that just a moment. As you can see, hardware transcoding is now activated, but notwithstanding the CPU and memory bump, but if we go to my local machine, we're able to see that Plex there, GPU utilization has now dropped in terms of what Plex is utilizing in that transcoding, and are largely down to the overhead that's now been passed over to the server, and their N510 CPU now taking a lot of the load. Carrying on with 8K testing, now we're going to have there on the web browser an HDR 60 frames per second file here. This is VP90 as well, and on the application here we're going to run Rio, which is another VP90 30 frames per second file there. Should play in original quality here on the client application, as you can see there, and we've gone into a conversion there in terms of the second file there, the Nightscape, I believe it's Nightscape Japan. And if we look at the CPU utilization, we spiked it just 20%. So again, we're not even at the quarter utilization of the CPU inside here. Now, keep in mind, I don't know what you're going to be using your NAS for, because as you can see with those two lines, Plex is actually using 20%, but the system is using 23%, likely because of things like Ubuntu running there in the background that this is running on. I'm not running this on Unraid or TrueNAS. I'm running this on the included, as mentioned at the beginning, included Ubuntu. I believe Ubuntu 22, it might be 21, I can't remember, that's running on this system right now. But Plex running on, say, Unraid or TrueNAS, you may see a higher system utilization. Nevertheless, right now, I can comfortably say you're going to be able to run 8K media up to about 3 or 4 devices on this CPU, which again is phenomenal once you factor in the efficiency of that CPU and also the price point of this device. And indeed, now we're seeing the N150 and N355 arriving in NAS builds quite affordably. Look at that, $176 for the N5105 motherboard there, and if you include a CPU and memory, memory and SSD, just 226 there. We will be testing this mobile, by the way, here on the channel very, very soon. But let's close out on one last 8K test, shall we? This final test is using the Peru 8K file. This is the biggest 8K file that I have. This is one running at 60 frames per second HDR HEVC. This file is around 4 gigabytes in size. So let's go ahead and play this file with both versions transcoding right now. So let's open that up. Bring up both versions there because I accidentally closed them, and both of them this time I want to utilize transcoding, and it's going to be aggressive. We're moving an 8K file into 160p, which is horrendous low quality. The same goes with this one. We're going to convert this one down to a horrific 160 potato quality, and we're going to have these running side by side. This is the most aggressive act that we've done on this thus far. The web browser is definitely having an absolute mare, and if we look at the CPU utilization is at just 13%. I fully expect that to spike, but as you can see from the bottom left there, buffering the dark orange versus playback on the light orange took a little bit longer there on the web browser there with those big conversions down. Ultimately, all of the tests here have indicated that the N5105 is definitely enjoying that additional quarter of a gigahertz additional graphical capabilities that this CPU factors in. So again, if you are looking at the N100 as a CPU choice in your DIY NAS or pre-built NAS solutions, maybe factor in that N5105, because right now, as a refresh, Intel are going to be moving over to it anyway. The price point is going to be largely the same, and the capabilities of this CPU are that much better. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks again to GMK Tech for supplying the unit for this. They didn't pay for this video. They have no influence in this. We've already done a review of this box and it will be linked below. I recommend you check that out. But thank you so much for watching. I've linked to a few other optional N150 NAS solutions in the description below. So if you found this video helpful, and if you're going to visit the stores that I've linked below anyway, please use those links. We get a small commission and it helps us keep doing what we do. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.